आज मैं अपनी बात कुछ अलग तरीके से रखना चाहती हूँ। कहते हैं ना, जो चीज दिल से जुड़ी होती है, भाषा भी कुछ वैसी ही निकलती है। तो बस प्रकृति की बात है, तो कुछ पंक्तियां हैं जो मैं चाहूंगी सुनाना और फिर उसके साथ शुरू करना चाहूंगी। जैसा कि हम सब जानते हैं, अभी कोविड का टाइम चल रहा है और एक पोस्ट था जो काफी वायरल हुआ था। सीपी और इंडिया गेट पे पक्षी जो है वो मेन रोड पे बैठ के दाना चुग रहे हैं। बड़ा ही खूबसूरत मनोरम दृश्य था। तो कुछ पंक्तियां ऐसी लिखी हुई है जो मुझे बड़ी ही अच्छी लगी, या शायद कहीं ये कही कि दिल को छू गई, तो मैं वो आप लोगों के साथ शेयर करना चाहूँ। आज प्रकृति का भी कहर देखा है, आज प्रकृति का भी कहर देखा है, अपनों को अपनों से अलग होते देखा है, इंसान को घर में कैद होते देखा है। जरा गौर फरमाइएगा, इंसान को घर में कैद होते देखा है और पशु पक्षी को आजाद घूमता देखा है। खेल रहे थे इंसान प्रकृति के साथ, आज प्रकृति को इंसान के साथ खेलते देखा है। इसलिए कहते हैं, प्रकृति देती जीवन दान, हम सभी करें इसका सम्मान। जी, इसके साथ शुरू करूंगी। नमस्कार टू ऑल, a very warm welcome to each and everyone in our second series of webinar. I am grateful to all of you for making our first webinar huge success. Again, with the same hope, we are presenting our second series of webinar of Supreme Court Women Lawyers Association. This time, we kept a subject which is related to each and everyone. Yeah, that's what I have said earlier also. कि हम ये सिर्फ मुझसे या मैं से नहीं जुड़ा हुआ है, ये हम सभी से जुड़ा हुआ है। तो एक ऐसा सब्जेक्ट जो सबके दिल को छू जाए, और इसके ऊपर जो हमारे स्पीकर्स हैं बोलने वाले, वो तो उससे भी बहुत अच्छे हैं, जिन्होंने काफी काम करा है इसके लिए। तो मैं उनसे बात में आऊंगी। So let's first introduce my team, Supreme Court Women Lawyers team. Our most energetic president, Ms. Mahalakshmi Pavni ji, senior advocate. Then we have our vice president, Bhakti Pasrija ji, Priyanka Mathur ji. Then General Secretary, me myself, Prerna Kumari. Then Mansa Singh, Assistant Secretary. Sudha Pal, Treasurer. Subhra Saha, Assistant Treasurer. And Mahir Ravish, Member Executive. So now coming to the speakers. कहते हैं एक प्यारी सी स्माइल के साथ। जी, मैं इसलिए एक बात कर रही हूँ, शी इज अ वेरी डिग्निफाइड लॉयर, बट शी इज अ ब्यूटीफुल स्माइल, वेरी स्वीट स्माइल। जी, अनीता शिनॉय मैम, हम सब उनसे बहुत प्यार करते हैं, तो वो बहुत ही स्वीट है और बहुत अच्छे से हर बात को समझाती है। सो शी विल बी स्पीकिंग ऑन द टॉपिक टुडे। एंड द सेकेंड, माय फ्रेंड भक्ति पसरेजा, इन्होंने काफी काम किया है गवर्नमेंट के ऊपर, केस डाला था, काफी अच्छा ऑर्डर भी उसमें मिला था। तो आई थिंक कि वो इस पे काम प्रकाश डाल सकती हैं। So let's I will now request Priyanka Mathur to kindly give welcome.
Water dispute before Supreme Court of India and Mahadevi Water Dispute Tribunal. She was on Union of India panel between August 2012 and 13. She is also in panel as a Michael Cure, Supreme Court of India since 2018. She is wearing different hats, viewers, but the main thing is on the topic related thing. She is legal advisor to Legal Initiative for Forest and Environment for Supreme Court litigation 2006 onwards. She is member advisory board, the Access Initiative TAI since 2010. She is legal advisor to the NGO platform on shipbreaking. She has also undertaken various assignments as consultants like international trade in endangered species of wild fauna and flora. Have been appointed consultant to Ministry of Health and Family Welfare since 2002 to 2003. In addition to these, she has attended various seminars and conferences representing India and presenting papers on different topics related to environmental students. Welcome, Anita Shinoy, ma'am. We are super excited to have you here, and I'm sure the viewers will benefit a lot from your expert opinion. Thank you.
Priyanka. Thank you, Priyanka. Before going to our President Mahalakshmi Pavni ji, I would like to share something which I had a talk with Anita Shinoy ma'am. I called her up and I said, कि ma'am, there is a topic. It was different from environment, and I said, कि ma'am, हम चाहते हैं कि आप उसके ऊपर बोलें. And she told me, Prerna, that's nice. It's a good topic. लेकिन मुझे इस पे नहीं बोलना, मुझे इन्वायरमेंट के ऊपर बोलना है और मैं चाहती हूँ कि मैं उसके ऊपर बोलूँ. ऐसे सेट कि मैं अपनी जो भी बोलूंगी इन्वायरमेंट के ऊपर, मैं अपने दिल से बोलूंगी. तो ये एक बहुत बड़ी बात होती है, आपका जुड़ाव, आपका उसके साथ कितना अपनापन है प्रकृति के साथ, ये अपने आप में दिखता है. तो उनसे सुनने का एक जो हमारे को जो बेनिफिट होगा वो एक अलग ही होगा. So now I would request Mahalakshmi Pavni ma'am, our president, senior advocate, to introduce the topic.
A very good evening to all of you. A very happy Onam to all my viewers and my esteemed audience. It's indeed a pleasure to invite you all to this webinar on the topic trends in environmental students of the Supreme Court. And it's a great, great pleasure to invite my dear friend Anita. Anita Shanoy is a very dear friend to me. She's a most humble, grounded, level-headed, senior advocate, and she's an expert in environmental laws. She has contributed immensely to creating an environmental friendly atmosphere in this country. She has represented my state Supreme Court for 10 long years, the longest ever, and she's made Karnataka very, very proud of her. And girls, I must tell you all that Anita Shanoy is the second woman to be designated from Karnataka state, the first being me. Now let me try just say a few things about this topic. Mulato Brahma Rupaya Madhyate Vishnu Rupini Aghrato Shive Rupaya Viksharajaye Namaha. That means salutation to the king of trees, whose root is in the form of Brahma, middle is the form of Lord Vishnu, and top is the form of Lord Shiva. This is how we Indians pray to the universe, pray to the environment of our country, of the world. Not only our country, but we Indians are very religious, and we pray to the 5 elements of nature: this earth, fire, space, air, and water. So it is not only from now, but from ancient civilization, if you see, that we always worshipped Mother Nature. Our verses, shlokas, start with the verse Om Prakritiye Namaha. So even the Yagnavalkya Smriti has categorically held that it prohibited cutting of trees, and the violators were given punishments. And apart from Yagnavalkya Smriti also, if you see Kausalya's Arthashastra, you will see, which was written during the Mauryan period, during Ashoka's time, King Emperor Ashoka's time, he has given a lot of importance to this forest administration and protection of animal welfare. So you can see this. This is evidence in the edicts and edified in the Ashoka pillar, the 5th edict at Sarnath. Apart from that, our old civilizations, that's the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa civilization, also witnessed the fact that the ruins are witness to the fact that it was an eco-friendly atmosphere we lived in. It was environmental friendly, and people lived in harmony and coexisted together with nature. But you know, after Harappa and after the Mauryan Emperor, then we had the invasion of Mughal rulers, the Tughlaq rulers, then the Maratha Empire, Britishers. So, I mean, they all, in fact, Sher Shah Suri also contributed to environment by, building the Grand Trunk Road. But he had a lot of plants and trees were grown on both the sides to provide shade to the needy travelers and things like that. But the Britishers, when they ruled India from 1600, when St. Thomas More, he came to Kerala in 1600 BC, and the Britishers looted, plundered, and they violated our economic resources, our natural economic resources. They plundered, in fact, they violated. So there was nothing left. And then we were busy in our freedom struggle. So the pre-independence era and the post-independence era, you will not find much of any environmental progress as such, because there was no economic environmental policy also prevailing that time. But it was in 1970. It was when people started, when there was rapid urbanization, industrialization. Then the government started noticing that there was an environmental imbalance, soil erosion, deforestation of trees, indiscriminate felling of trees. It was then the government woke up and they said, look, we have to preserve and conserve our environment. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a concrete jungle. So that is how the government opened its eyes, and it brought about some measures, more stringent measures to promote environmental protection and conserve the environment. So that in 1972, they wanted to have a committee, a large committee, central to coordinate and generate with coherence and implement its programs and policies. That's how the National Committee for Environmental Protection and Coordination came into existence. After that, the Indian government, they wanted to promote green revolution. They wanted a clean environment. They wanted greenery. It was after the agricultural revolution, they started the green revolution. They wanted the 5-year policy had been implemented. So when the green revolution came, a lot of laws were brought in. And the first major law which came into force was the Water Act of 1986. It came 2 years after the Stockholm Conference. So this act epitomized that to bring this environment into, to give it a legal perspective, protect the environment. So there have been a plethora of enactments and policies and everything, but which could not be implemented or conserved or not strictly followed. And where the government, I mean the legislature and executive field, it was then the judiciary stepped into play a very important role. It not only played the role of interpreting the constitution, but it had to play the role of monitoring the situation and implementing policies. And it was building a nation towards an environmental free atmosphere as such. Then Justice P.N. Bhagwati, the pioneer of public interest litigation in India, he and Justice Krishna Iyer relaxed these laws. They relaxed the definition of the word locus standi. So because of which there were many conscious citizens, like-minded citizens, community organizations who could move the court for implementation of the protection of the environment. So it is courtesy them. They were not fighting for individual rights. They were fighting for community rights, because these are also fundamental duties. When I said about Ashoka Pillar, you kindly see from the Ashoka Pillar, it has been brought into our constitution also. So you can see that reflection of those thoughts from the Mauryan era have been put into our constitution in the guise of fundamental duties and directive principles of state policy and things like that. So it has always been there that we need to protect our environment. Now, apart from the fact that the Supreme Court has stepped in, and the courts and the Supreme Court has stepped in, and it's not only stepped in, it has received standing ovation and a great applause for its innovative jurisprudence. Apart from the innovative jurisprudence, I would also say that it sometimes had overstepped its reach. It has gone into something called extravagant jurisdiction. It has stepped into the domains of the legislature and executive, which nothing can be done about it, because at the end of the day, it was the legislature and the executive that has. So it came into what you say, the checks and balances of the constitution were not followed properly because of this judicial overstepping. But the brighter point is that it monitored the evolution, it monitored the environment as such. So that is how we've got so many wonderful things. I mean, there are so many things happening. And apart from that, we have MC Mehta and Miss Anita Shanoy, who has helped this Indians at large. Because of them, we see greener, green pastures, we see cleaner air. In fact, this lockdown also, if you see, my dear friends, don't look at one side of the coin and say the lockdown is, like this. The lockdown has brought certain positive effects also. We see a blue sky, we see cleaner air. There is so much of pollution which has gone away. I mean, the birds are coming, migratory birds. So it has a positive effect also, because I don't want you all to see the glass as half empty, you know, I see it as half full. So that is my thing. And another thing was in 1989, I think, this decision of the Supreme Court, you know, where a gas leak tragedy struck and there were many lives which were taken away, fatal, and it created havoc with the environment, the Union Carbide versus the Union of India. And this was a case where there was a transition from a strict liability to an absolutely no liability, absolute strict liability to an absolute liability. So apart from that, what I would like to say was why that was a very important case was because it borrowed jurisprudence from the other countries of the world, and they had to lay down the modus of compensation. They had to lay down the modus of accessibility, rehabilitation, because lives were involved. There were so many fatalities, and the environment was deeply havoc, and which resulted in permanent disability of many people, and it still continues. This happened in 1984, but it's still you can see the after effects even now. So this was a landmark case where environmental jurisprudence ensured there was compensation to all these people. Apart from that, there were three other principles which were laid down in 1996. It was the Vellore Citizens Forum, wherein there were three doctrines which are very, very important in environmental law. And these three doctrines are the doctrines of
precautionary principle.
Yes, the principles of the polluter pay principle, sustainable development, and the other, what is the other principle?
It's precautionary principle. And yeah,
the polluter pay principles and the principles of sustainable development, along with the onus of proof. So what has happened is these principles are now very, very important in environmental jurisprudence. Apart from this, what I would like to say is we as a SCWLA, we also worked for cleaner air pollution and sound pollution. So we ensured that the transiting trucks, there was a ban of polluting trucks in the state of Delhi. And then after that, the Supreme Court took over. And my dear friend and colleague Bhakti was instrumental in drafting the petition before the NGT. Now, Anita, I request you I thank you so much for having borne with me. And I would love to hear you speak. You have the entire audience to listen to you. Please take over, Anita. Please.
Can everybody see me?
Yes.
And hear me?
yes, you are audible.
Yes. I will be presenting by way of slides, but before that, thank you. Can you see me?
Yes, you are visible. You are very much visible.
Okay. Are the slides visible?
No, slides are not visible.
No. Slides are not visible. Just give me a minute. Are the slides visible now?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I start by thanking Mahalakshmi, my very dear friend. Thank you, Priyanka, Prerna, Mahi, Bhakti, Sudha, Mansa, Shubhra, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for letting me speak on a subject that I deeply love, and I have been involved with the subject for the last 25 years. And without much ado, I'm going to just straight away start. I've actually divided my presentation in 3 segments. One is to put it very simply, the factual matrix, which is the environment status as it is today. What is the environment status? The second aspect, which is the most important aspect, is the law. And the third is what are our challenges in the future. So I'm going to straight away get into my slides. I'm going into my slide number 1. Is this visible, Mani?
It's visible. It's visible.
Now, now look at this slide. It says 15 of the 20 most polluted cities in the world are in India. Now, if one looks at this chart, it starts with the Gurgaon, Ghaziabad. You see Noida at number 6. Then you see Delhi at number 11. And so this is the kind of scenario that we're living in. This is just to put certain facts, I mean, so that the subject, the implication of the subject can be understood better when it's placed in this, spectrum of facts. So that means we live in Delhi and NCR, which is clearly the hottest of hotspots as far as pollution is concerned. The next slide. Now, pollution, be it air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, all has consequences. And as per a study, they said pollution causes more than 20 lakh deaths in a year in India. Next slide. Now, this slide is, I want to spend a little time on this slide. Now, what does this slide say? This slide says that India is ranked 168 out of 180 countries in the Environmental Pollution Index. Now, this is a sad state of affairs. And that is precisely why, I mean, I'm going to read, when I come to how the Supreme Court has stepped in and what should be something as a lawyer, what are the things that we can do, and as a citizen of this country, what we can do. And time has come now. I mean, this is not the time to contemplate, etc. Time is now only for action. And we can't take baby steps anymore. It's all about taking giant steps, especially in view of this context that I'm now showing you. The next slide. Now look at this. On one hand, the first slide showed you that 15 of the most polluted cities in the world are in India. But unfortunately, as per the NCRB, which is the National Crime Records Bureau, not a single case under the AIR Act was filed in 2017. So it's you can look at it. So there has been, so we live in the most polluted of cities, and the regulatory agencies have failed because they've not stepped in and taken action. And this is a sad state of affairs. Now the next slide. So this is again the same thing, that there is, even in 2016, there are no criminal cases filed under the AIR Act. The next slide. Now this is a very important slide. What does this say? Now, lot of people, when you talk about environment, or whenever I've argued environmental cases, many a times the one most important argument that is pitched against the environment is what happens to development, what happens to progress. Now, and I'm reminded of something Justice Deepak Gupta said in one of his lectures, is that bad environment can never be good economics. Unless and until you have, environment is healthy, only then it will lead to good economics. Now, even we don't need to look at anything further. Look at what happened to Delhi last year. The minute it's winter, you can't breathe. You can't breathe. Children don't go to school. There are a lot of lung infections. People are unable to go to work. So there is a direct link between economics and environment. And in fact, the World Bank says that environmental degradation costs India 5.7% of the GDP. So there is a very, very direct nexus between environment, development, and any kind of progress for human, for us as a human race. Now, this is just a general background before I got into the law, which is really the meat of my presentation today. Next slide. Now, there are several principles over a period of time that India has adopted. The Indian courts have adopted, they have improvised on, they have created certain principles. And a few of these principles which are very important in environmental jurisprudence are the precautionary principle, reversal of burden of proof, the polluter pays principle, species best interest standard, sustainable development, ecocentric approach, and one which is not here, which is the public trust doctrine. Now, I will not deal with precautionary or polluter pays principle, etc., because they are fairly common and there are a lot of judgments. I'd rather deal with something that is more unique and maybe not so well, well read by everybody. Before I go to the next slide, the interesting thing that I want to say about this slide is the reversal of burden of proof. Now, unlike in common, be it civil law or criminal law, it is always the burden is on the person who alleges something. If I go to court as a petitioner asking for something, the burden is on me. But whereas in environmental jurisprudence, there's a reversal of burden of proof. The burden of proof is not on the petitioner who goes to court, but the burden of proof is on the person. Say somebody is building a dam on the river Ganges. Then the burden of proof is on the person who builds the dam. He has to show that his building of the dam is not going to cause damage to the river. So the burden is on him to show that his actions are environmentally benign and environmentally not damaging. So there is in environmental jurisprudence, as against any other law, be it criminal or civil, there's a reversal of burden of proof. Now my next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Now I will now go into the various doctrines. Now this slide, now if you look at this slide, this is a slide of a Span resort, which is in Himachal Pradesh. And on the side of it, you will see the beautiful Beas River. Now, what happened is, this is the first case when Indian courts, or rather the Indian Supreme Court, adopted the public trust doctrine. What happened in this case is, the Span resorts, as you would see, they started building on the river bed. And also what they did is, they changed the course of the river Beas. Some part of the stretch the course of the river itself was changed. And the Supreme Court, Justice Kuldeep Singh, they stepped in and they said, sorry. What did they say? They said that just a minute, I'm not able to read this. Just give me a minute, please. I can't see this. नहीं आएगा? Oh. Okay, I can only see half of my screen share. Anyway, no harm. It says the state is the trustee of all natural resources which are by nature, and they're meant for public use and enjoyment. So in this case, what happened was, the state of Himachal Pradesh had leased out very, very prime forest land and some part of the river for Span resorts. And court stepped in. Sorry, they said rivers, forests, wetlands, seas, all these are natural resources, and the only trustee of the natural resources is the state, and these resources are meant for public use and not for conversion into private ownership. So that's how the doctrine of public trust was introduced in India. Though it's a common law doctrine, and then it was improved upon by American courts in Lake Mono, etc. It arrived in India for the first time in 1997. And in this case, what the court finally did is, it quashed the lease. It said, sorry, the state is a trustee. It cannot divert the riverbed or these prime forests for private ownership. And they said, you hold it in trust for the people, and it is meant for the people and for their enjoyment, and not for one private entity. And this public trust doctrine also evolved over a period of time. And this is again, this is Justice Radhakrishnan's judgment, which is I'm quite sure is something that is creation of the Supreme Court that extended the principle of public trust. And this says that the state as a custodian of natural resources has a duty to maintain them not merely for the benefit of public, which is human public, but for the best interest of flora and fauna, wildlife, and so on. So he said that, look, boss, you can't confine natural resources you can't hold it only for public use, but you have to protect it even for the sake of plant life and animal life. And so the principle of public trust was extended, it was improved upon, it was given more life by Justice Radhakrishnan in this judgment. The next is then, now everybody knows commonly, lot of resources like be it iron ore, be it coal, they're all generally found in forest areas. So you can't say that forests can never be diverted, because under those forests you have these minerals, you need them. So what did they say? The Supreme Court once again in the special reference stepped in, and they said that whenever public resources or natural resources are given for any private enterprise, the court stepped in and imposed a duty upon itself. It said that, look, whenever a state holds something in public trust and for any necessity it is diverted to private use, then a high degree of judicial scrutiny of that action is necessary. So the court stepped in and imposed upon itself a larger role to protect these resources and said, we will look at this allocation very, very carefully. Next. So this is as far as the public trust doctrine is concerned. Now the next slide is Jallikattu. Now Jallikattu, is bullfighting, which is in vogue, bullock cart fighting, bullfighting, etc., bull race. And now this is all, vogue in Tamil Nadu. It's a tradition that has been continued for about 400 years. Now, again, in this case, Tamil Nadu had its own legislation for, they had provided a methodology as to how this Jallikattu should be done every year, etc., etc. But the Supreme Court stepped in and said, no, we have something called the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And they said that act, which is a central act, has to prevail. And once again, Justice Radhakrishnan, I know all my quotes are from his judgments. I'm a big fan. Justice Radhakrishnan stepped in, and Mahalakshmi also said something to this effect, and I want to read this. He brought into Indian jurisprudence the species best interest standard, which is, he said, every species has an inherent right to live and shall be protected by law subject to exceptions provided out of necessity. But look at these beautiful words. He said, animal has also honor and dignity, which cannot be arbitrarily deprived of, and its rights and privacy have to be respected and protected from unlawful attack. And this is what he elevated the jurisprudence in this judgment. And what is interesting aside is the right to privacy to us humans came only through the Aadhaar judgment in 2018, whereas animals had right to privacy in 2014. So, and this species best standard principle has been used in some of his judgments. I mean, in fact, my next case also is going to be about this. So this is the way, I mean, and this, as Mahalakshmi was speaking about the ancient scriptures, etc., about the right to nature to live freely. It is not about us being superior to them, but the fact that we coexist with them. And this is the coexistence that is going to lead us to a better future, The next slide. Now, this is also very important. Court also said in this judgment, it brought in the principle of doctrine of parens patriae. It again imposed a duty upon itself. It said the court has also a duty under the doctrine of parens patriae to take care of animals since they are unable to take care of themselves as against human beings. So because they found that in these bullfights, bull races, what happened? There was a lot of physical and mental torture on these animals. They lived in fear and anxiety. And why was this? This was only for the pleasure of the human beings. It wasn't out of any kind of necessity. So that's why the court stepped in and said, no, sorry, these rules are repugnant to the central law. And this is the kind of protection that we should give to animals. The next slide, please. Okay. Now, this is a slide you will see in your slide are the beautiful Asiatic lions. Now, these Asiatic lions were at one point of time found in North Africa, some parts of Southeastern Asia, if I'm not mistaken. But today, there is only one subpopulation of the Asiatic lion, and that is in the Gir forest of India, Gujarat. So it is now only one subpopulation of about 500, maybe give and take a few numbers in India. So we went to court in this litigation and we said, look, please have a second home for the lions. Have a second home for them. Why? Because if you have one subpopulation in one place, you just need one wildfire or you need one, epidemic like your distemper, canine distemper that happened and wiped out a few hundred species. We said, find a second home for it. You relocate some lions to Madhya Pradesh. And they found that there was a second home which mirrored the habitat that they lived in Gujarat, in Madhya Pradesh. And we said you relocate a few so that this species doesn't become completely wiped out from the face of the earth. To protect the species, to continue this endangered species, we went to court and court stepped in and said, yes, you relocate a few lions to Kunokbalpur in Madhya Pradesh. Now, while doing so, the legal principles that were enunciated in this judgment are, please, you can read on the screen. It says, it talks about anthropocentrism. Now, anthropocentrism, what does it mean? It means something which is always focused on human interest. So when you look at environmental jurisprudence, all our thinking has been human interest focused. Humans first, everybody else later. So just once again, Justice Radhakrishnan in this judgment said that, look, we need to shift. It is time that we shifted our thinking and our focus from anthropocentrism to ecocentrism. Now, what is ecocentrism? Ecocentrism is nature-centered, where humans are a part of nature and non-humans have intrinsic value, and humans have obligations to non-humans independent of human interest. So ecocentrism is life-centered, nature-centered, and where nature includes both human and non-human, not one more superior than the other. So he said in environmental jurisprudence, this is a major shift, because be it sustainable development, be it the principle of polluter pays, everything has had an anthropocentric bias. It's always been a human interest first bias. So with this judgment, he talked about a shift. He said it's time we thought about nature as a composite whole. It talked about ecocentric principles. Next slide. Now, this is my, this is a slide. This is also a litigation that I was involved in. It basically talked, sorry. somebody is talking anyway. This is a slide which talks about bauxite mining in Orissa. Now, what is this case about? This case is about Vedanta wanted to do bauxite mining on a particular hill, and that hill is known as Niyamgiri. And head of that hill, on top of that hill, was the abode of the gods of two primitive tribal groups known as Dongriya Konds and Kutia Konds. Now, Dongriya Konds and Kutia Konds reside on this Niyamgiri hill, and they reside there. Their cultural rites, their religious rites, etc. Part of their religious rites was to pray to Niyam Raja, who, according to them, lived on top of this hill. This entire tribe actually were nature worshippers. So they said that, look, if you permit bauxite mining to happen on top of this hill, it will completely destroy their place of worship. And Supreme Court stepped in once again and said, sorry, you may want to mine bauxite, but it cannot happen at the cost of religious rights of the Dongriya Konds and the Kutia Konds, who have been nature worshippers on this hill for time immemorial. And the court stepped in and said that unless the Gram Sabhas of those villages give consent and unless you protect their religious rights, no mining can happen on this hill. And they succeeded. The beauty of this judgment is, after a very, very long, almost I think 15 years to 20 year fight, back and forth, they succeeded. All the Gram Sabha said, no, sorry, you cannot do mining on top of this hill because this is our place of worship. And the Supreme Court gave its seal of approval to this and said, unless their religious rights are protected, you cannot, this hill cannot be used for mining. And now I've spoken about 2-3 principles. I've spoken about species best standard principle. I've spoken about the public trust doctrine. I have spoken about the ecocentric principle. I've spoken about the parents patria principle. Now, all these principles, I mean, thanks to the Supreme Court, at various points of time, they've stepped in beautifully and enunciated this and improved the environmental jurisprudence. But we still have a very, very, very long way to go. And especially in the present scenario, when we are faced with climate change threats, everybody has to step in. And I want to read a couple of things which I've put together. And this is from a book known as Uninhabitable Earth by Wallace Wells. Now, what he says is that no human has ever lived on a planet as hot as this one, and it might get even hotter. Just 2 degrees increase in temperature will lead to, I think I'm unable to read my own slide. It will lead to increase in sea level, and it will be enough to drown Shanghai, Hong Kong, Mumbai, and Kolkata. So that is the kind of serious climate change threats. In fact, even if our climate, even if our Earth was to get even a degree warmer, it will have devastating impacts. And the reason why I put these slides in my presentation is that, climate change is going to have, it has come. It is going to have extremely serious impacts. And we already see it. It's just that we live far away from it. Maybe it doesn't impact us personally, but like in Sundarbans, land is just chipped away and taken into the sea. And in fact, these articles will show you that in 2050, Mumbai will look as it did in 1700s. Now, everybody knows that Mumbai has been on reclaimed land. Seas have been filled with, with mud, etc. And it's on this reclaimed land that many parts of Mumbai has come up. So with this rise in temperature and with climate change, Mumbai will once again be underwater. Most parts of Mumbai, even you, all of us have seen tremendous increase in floods, tremendous increase in landslides. We have seen unprecedented rain, increase in temperature. Now all this has come to stay. Now, and in fact, what is sad is that climate change impacts women and girls much worse than it impacts men or male children. Why is that? It is because of the societal context of taboos. Now, if I show you my next slide says, I'll just read it out to you. It says, globally, a person dies every 1.5 seconds due to drowning. And this rate has quickened because of ever increased climate change impacts like large scale flooding. And the situation is all the more difficult for women and young girls who are often bound by social and cultural customs and taboos. And they don't learn swimming and they fall victim to such extreme weather events. They said, Malini Mehra, had said in one of her reports that in 1991, when there was a cyclone disaster in Bangladesh, 90% of the 140,000 people who died were women. And so the climate change impacts are going to be faced by women much more. And even things like when you don't have adequate water, it is women who have to, walk for miles to get water. If there are floods like in Assam, etc., it's more women who die. So climate change is going to impact women in a much greater extent. And therefore, the time really has come for all of us to put our heads together and, as lawyers, as citizens, in every which way that we can. I mean, we are conscious of the climate change and that we do something to protect our environment, and not only for ourselves, our future generations. I'll just end with a slide. This is Justice Chandrachud's in Hanuman Aroskar, where he says there can really be no gambles with environment. Heads you win, tails you lose approach is unacceptable. If you want to preserve environmental governance under the rule of law, you can't have a lackadaisical or a very casual approach. One has to really now, be soldiers in this war to protect the environment. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for having me and giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thanks, ma'am. Very well explained. You have touched each and every aspect of the topic. And it's very true that Supreme Court always come forward to save environment. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are audible.
Fine. So our next speaker, she is Bhakti Pasreja Sethi, and she is also Vice President of Supreme Court Women Lawyers Association. Let me introduce you. She's also been gold medalist of her law college, and she was very keen to save the environment. And I remember in the year 2001, she came to me and she said she wanted to file a case, and she wanted that, just let me see, there is one. Yeah, what she wanted, what the prayer was actually, that it was we have filed on behalf of SCWLA, and it was SCW has sought direction for framing of appropriate guidelines for diversion of the commercial vehicle which pass through Delhi and deputation of a special police force on the border to ensure action and check on entry of these vehicles. And what the Sutendra Kumar has said on that issue, Delhiites are breathing poison. So it was a very important matter which she took up, and she came before the NGT. And she has, I remember she visited to that place also physically, and she saw what alternate route can be done, what alternate route or what alternate map can be given before the court. So she presented that map also before the court, and somehow I remember that was accepted also. So now I would request Bhakti Pasreja Sethi to kindly come and say a few words regarding environment.
Thank you so much, Prerna. Am I visible? Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, in fact, Prerna, you always have been pillar of support. Like you were there in that matter, in the air pollution matter, which we filed for diversion of trucks, which used to visit Delhi at night and used to cause sleeping pollution. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Mahalakshmi Pavni ma'am, Anita Shenoy ma'am, all my friends in EASY. It's my privilege to speak on the topic Friends in Environmental Jurisprudence of Supreme Court today here on behalf of SCWLA. In fact, I would say because I am very much part of SCWLA. Well, I've appeared in many matters in Supreme Court of India also and NGT also in many environmental matters. And what I have observed, like in most of the matters, whether they were in Supreme Court or in NGT, although Anita ji has touched most of the things, but I would focus on the basic trends and the things which Anita ji has not touched so that there is no duplicacy. I would focus on principles because there would be so many young students also who might not be aware of those principles. So the foremost trend which I observed in all the matters, that the Supreme Court has always focused on sustainable development. Sustainable development is the thing which I've observed in most of the matters, most of the major environmental matters. Now, what is the sustainable development? Sustainable development means that the resources which are available to us today, they are used in such a way they are left in abundance for coming generations also. This is before, like Mahalakshmi Pavni ma'am said, in the last century, there was in the first few decades of the last century, there was no talk about environment. Much focus was not laid on environment conservation, environment protection, and there was all the focus was on industrialization, urbanization, and then the nations observed, the United Nations observed that environment has been deteriorating. There was global warming and greenhouse emissions, receding glaciers, and water levels in oceans was also rising. So in 1972, there was a conference in Stockholm, and then the Stockholm Declaration was the first where major concerns about environment were expressed. There, the nations, the participating members, they agreed that we will accept the responsibility for the environmental effects which are caused by us, and we will take steps to mitigate them. And after Stockholm Declaration, there were some other conferences also, like Rio Conference, Paris Convention on Environment. There also much emphasis was laid on sustainable development. So, like we all have heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Pact. So, what is the Great Pacific Garbage Pact? It comprises of 87,000 metric tons of plastics. And in fact, there are two patches in Pacific Oceans which comprise of plastics. And we saw that one whale which inhaled that plastic, 48 kgs of plastic, and she died in the pathetic condition. So when there is so much plastic floating in the oceans, we have also heard about the North Atlantic garbage patch also. It also comprises of plastic. So what the effect it has on ecology, the marine life, it has devastating effect. The fishes which are living in waters, the turtles which are living in water, what human intervention, what we are doing to all these organisms. Well, when I talk about the Pacific garbage patch and Atlantic garbage patch, this reminds me of our own Supreme Court Ganga pollution case. So this was the Ganga pollution case. Here it's very pertinent to mention why the Ganga pollution matter was filed in Supreme Court of India. It was filed by MC Mehta ji, who is a senior advocate and environmentalist also. In fact, what happened? One smoker toasted a cigarette, toasted a matchstick, and it fell into River Ganga, and it led to huge fire, 30 hours of fire in River Ganga. And you can imagine what 30 hours of fire would have caused. There are so many fishes, so many organisms in the river, and the fire was there. So when like investigation was made, how this fire happened? It is water, a fire in water. What is this? So then it transpired that there were so many industries, so many refineries which were discharging their waste in Ganga river, and it led to forming of a chemical layer on the water. So a simple matchstick resulted in a huge fire. So like this infuriated our MC Mehta ji, senior lawyer. So he filed a petition before the Honorable Supreme Court of India. It was a public interest litigation in 1985. And he said that the state government and in fact all the government, all the authorities, they have grossly failed to take any steps to prevent this pollution. And Ganga river, it's our heritage, it's a holy river. So something should be done, steps should be taken to protect the river for conservation of ecology and everything. So the Honorable Supreme Court passed a very good judgment. In fact, there are so many directions have been passed over the years in this matter. And because Ganga river, it's a huge, Ganga basin, it's 2,500 kilometers tract, huge tract. So Kanpur, which is in the center, it's in the middle of the basin. It was selected as a central point. So, and in Kanpur, it was observed that the whole river had turned red because the tanneries were discharging their waste. So then various directions were issued by the Honorable Supreme Court. And now when we go to Haridwar, we find pure Ganga river, clean Ganga river. So I think hats off to the Honorable Supreme Court, which emerged as protector of environmental rights. And like legal innovation, I would say legal innovation and judicial activism, they have resulted in evolution of the environmental jurisprudence. The sustainable development, first time this word was used by the Honorable Supreme Court in one matter. This is Rural Litigation and Environment Kendra versus State of UP. So what happened in this matter in the city of Dehradun? There was lot of mining, unauthorized mining, which unauthorized, or we would say some authorized mining also. Mining of limestone quarries, it was being carried out, and it resulted in soil erosion. Soil erosion was taking place. So it was affecting trees also, because when soil will erode, there would be trees will fall and the whole environment and ecology would be disturbed. So in this matter, the Honorable Supreme Court for the first time used the concept of sustainable development and passed various directions for stopping that mining and laid various guidelines also. Like in Ganga pollution matter also, the Honorable Supreme Court had laid some guidelines for shifting of the industries and for establishment of water treatment plants so that untreated water is not discharged into rivers. Then we have Taj Trapezium case. Taj Trapezium case, what happened there? In Mathura, there were some refineries and some industries which were emitting sulfur dioxide. And sulfur dioxide, when it combined with moisture in the air and oxygen, it formed sulfuric acid. And sulfuric acid, it took the form of acid rain and it eroded the marble of Taj Mahal. Then Justice Kuldeep Singh, who is also known as Green Judge, like he said, he wrote a very beautiful judgment. And in fact, when we read the Taj Trapezium judgment, it's a beautiful judgment, very poetic judgment, various instances from old era, various poets have been quoted in that judgment. So Justice Kuldeep Singh, he created Taj Trapezium and Green Belt was formed. Various directions were issued, like the industries who were polluting, they were either to be shut down or have to be relocated somewhere else. And the industries who were there, who were permissible there, they had to adhere to the emission norms. So the sustainable development principle, this principle has been followed by Supreme Court thereafter in many cases, like Narmada Bachao Andolan case also, and in many other cases also. Pursuant to sustainable development, one more thing which the Honorable Supreme Court has done, that it has elevated right to clean and free environment to the status of fundamental right. In matters of Subhash versus State of Bihar, in Damodar Rao's matter, the Honorable Supreme Court said that right to clean air, right to clean water, it's a fundamental right, and anybody, if it is infringed, anybody can approach either the High Court or Supreme Court, and now National Green Tribunal is there. If this right is violated, anybody can approach the fora and can get redressal. Then the other principle, because there are so many things which Anita ji have already dealt with, so I won't touch them. The other thing which is very important, like Anita ji also said, precautionary principle and polluter pays principle. These are also very important principles which the young students, I guess, they would also like to understand what's the precautionary principle. So I would explain them in bit detail. The precautionary principle, as the name suggests, like taking precaution, principle to take precaution so that no harm is done to environment. So what precautionary principle says, I would read out. In Vellore Citizens Forum versus Union of India, the Honorable Supreme Court explained precautionary principle. In the context of municipal laws, it meant that environmental measures by state government and the authorities must anticipate, prevent, and attack the causes of environmental degradation. They must anticipate, prevent, and attack the causes of environmental degradation. Secondly, where there are threats or serious or irreversible damage, lack of scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures to prevent environmental degradation. So this is the precautionary principle which Supreme Court has invoked in so many matters later. The third is polluter pays principle. In its judgment in Indian Council for Enviro Legal Action versus Union of India in 1996, the Honorable Court said, as it says, polluter pays, like whosoever pollute, he will have to pay. The court said, once the activity carried on is hazardous or inherently dangerous, the person carrying on such activity is liable to make good the loss caused to any other person by his activity, irrespective of the fact whether he took reasonable care or he did not took reasonable care. The polluter pays principle, as interpreted by Honorable Court, means that absolute liability for harm to the environment extends not only to compensate the victims of pollution, but it also includes cost of restoring the environmental degradation. So this is also very important principle, which also it is also part of absolute liability principle, which was later evolved, and also it's also like polluter pays principle and precautionary principle. They are basic. They are two segments of sustainable development only. Then the third principle, which Anita ji has very comprehensively discussed in her slides, and it has been beautifully discussed, so I won't explain it much. It's a public trust doctrine. So it was dealt with in matter of MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath. So what was the basic, although I wanted to read out, but what was the basic crux of, what is the basic crux of this doctrine? It means that it's public trust doctrine, that state, it's the guardian, and whatever the resources we have on this earth, the rivers, the mountains, the beautiful things, everything on this earth, whatever state is like a protector. So it holds those things in public trust. So it has to preserve them, it has to conserve them, and it can't just hand it over to somebody and destroy their original thing. In fact, the state can't destroy the basic structure and cause irreparable damage to the environment. So this is also one principle which has always been a guiding factor, and it's a major trend in environmental jurisprudence. And like Anita ji has also discussed so many judgments, so I won't be touching all those judgments. Then I would speak about some constitutional provisions which have been guiding force. Like before 1972, there was not many things which we had in our constitution. We had Article 47, which spoke about public health, and public health, it was interpreted, it had something to do with environment also. We have Article 48A, which was also part of directive principles, and it speaks about conservation of environment. So it was in part 4 of the Constitution, directive principles. Then we have one Article 51A, which is which is a fundamental duty, and it gives a duty to all the citizens of India to protect environment, to take care of wildlife, to protect forests, and to be conscious. And I would say it implies that everybody should be conscious about sustainable development. Then there is last thing, absolute liability, the doctrine of absolute liability. So what is this doctrine of absolute liability? In fact, we have all heard about Bhopal gas leak case and Oleum gas leak case. This absolute liability is what it was evolved by the Honorable Supreme Court of India in Oleum gas leak case. What had happened, Shriram Food and Fertilizers Industries in Delhi, there was a gas leakage, and there was so much damage which was done to so many people. And the Honorable Court said, like, court was in fact wondering what to do, because till then the courts in India were just following the old principle of strict liability, which was once evolved by House of Lords in matter of Rylance versus Fletcher. What was the strict liability principle? That if somebody has something in his premises and that thing escapes, then there is a strict liability. The owner of that premises, he is liable to compensate. But there were certain exceptions which were available to the owner, like he could plead that it was act of God, or I was not negligent, or it was caused by a stranger, a third person. So all these exceptions, this is the principle of 19th century, and we were following in last century also. So the Honorable Court said, like Justice Bhagwati, in fact, Justice Bhagwati evolved this doctrine. Justice Bhagwati said that in the chain scenario, when there is so much industrialization and so much damage is caused, we have to evolve our own principles. We have to evolve our own doctrine. We can't just simply follow what is being evolved by other courts. So this doctrine of absolute liability was evolved, and it means that if there is something in some premises, if there is an enterprise which is indulged in profitable activities, and they are carrying out some activities, and as a result of those activities, there is some damage which is done to environment and to some people, whether it's in their premises, it's in their factory, or it's outside their factory, they have to compensate for those damages, and they have to restore the environment also. So this is absolute liability principle. And in fact, we have also seen that 2 months ago only, there was a gas leakage in Vizag. So that time also, the Honorable National Green Tribunal took a suo motu cognizance and directed LG Polymers to pay 50 crores to the people who were affected. So it was only because of this principle of absolute liability. And we have, there is one more thing. There is one more thing regarding this absolute liability principle, that it has been incorporated now in National Green Tribunal Act of 2010. So it's very much part of Act now. It's in Section 17, and it literally quote the principle which was evolved by the Honorable Supreme Court. So these are the basic principles. Other things Anita ji have already discussed. These are the basic trends: sustainable development, polluter pays principle, precautionary principle, public trust doctrine, absolute liability principle. So these are some of the trends which have been evolved by Supreme Court. And one more thing, public interest litigations. Most of the public interest litigations, we have seen their evolution in environmental matters only. So these are some of the broad trends in environmental jurisprudence. One more thing, like I was discussing with Mahalakshmi ma'am, it's environmental policy of 2020, which is the draft of environmental policy. So although it's not the subject matter, but still in a new environmental policy, there are some exemptions. Like there are some clauses, some cases where it has been mentioned whenever there is a new project, whenever there is new development, people will be consulted, public will be consulted and objections will be invited from all. But there have been certain things which have been excluded from that ambit. There would be no consultation. So I think whenever the policy is ready, the government will take into consider all those things because as there has been quote by Justice Bhagwati also. I would read that quote. That court has to innovate new methods and strategies to provide access to justice to large masses of people who are denied basic rights, basic human rights, to whom freedom and liberty have no meaning. So this is the quote by Justice Bhagwati. Like suppose a project comes and we have seen in Greater Noida, I heard there is a village where due to the groundwater, it's so much polluted that most of the people, they caught cancer. It's a disease which was caught by them. So unless there is an objection, people can't do anything. There is one more thing. Justice Bhagwati said, government alone will never be able to do it. It is only the people themselves who must utilize law for purpose of bringing justice at doorsteps of large masses of people of the country. That's why the concept of public interest litigation has been coined in environmental matters. Justice Bhagwati also said, life means not only physical existence, it means use of every limb or faculty through which life is enjoyed. The right to life includes the right to healthy environment. So I would conclude my talk with this, that right to life include right to healthy environment. As we all have seen that recently all the turtles, where we have heard stories about turtles lying on the seashore, laying eggs, peacocks dancing on the streets, many birds, sparrows, which we thought have gone extinct, they returned to cities. So what human action has done to all these species, we owe some responsibility. So I think everybody would be a responsible citizen and we would contribute in our own ways for sustainable development. Thank you.
Thanks, Bhakti ji, for highlighting the principles. Now I would request Mansa Singh to kindly take question answer session. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. You are audible.
Mansa Singh, please.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, though I have a lot of questions in my mind, but I would like to ask some of them. Ma'am, Anita ma'am, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Ma'am, are environmental laws and judicial process too strict and too regressive? Does it actually hinder the development of the country?
Okay, I'll give you my very frank opinion. In fact, I feel that it's quite the reverse. I feel that, environmental rigors should be much stricter. And personally, I'm of the view that, there can never be a balance between something that is legal and illegal. Like, for instance, many times what happens is that, sometimes an industry comes up without a clearance, right? You need a forest clearance, you need an environmental clearance. Sometimes something comes up without getting a clearance, and courts have very often said, oh, but they've already spent so much of money. So therefore, let us balance the fact that they have spent money, and though they may not have a clearance, we will permit them to get a clearance now, but we will not demolish the structure. Now, I personally am a firm believer that if something is illegal, then no matter what consequence, like for instance, in the Maradu case, you would have heard it. It's a very famous case in the recent past where in Kerala, a huge building of flats had come up in the, in violation of the CRZ regulations. CRZ regulation says that you cannot build, so close to the sea coast and etc. So in contravention of the CRZ regulation, the huge multi-storied flats had come up, and the court said, sorry, you may have spent money, you people may have spent out of pocket, but the fact is the law of the land is very clear. You cannot construct in the CRZ, and therefore ordered demolition. Now, it may be coming at a high economic cost, but the cost to the environment is far greater. And I think the loss to the environment is irreparable, because money can come back, but environment once destroyed can never come back. So unless we send this very strict message that if something is illegal, then it has to go, unless that message goes, nothing can happen. So I'm a firm believer that it's not strict enough. Environmental regulations should be far strictly implemented.
Thank you, ma'am. One more question. Ma'am, what is your opinion on the latest environment impact assessment draft notification? Do you agree that Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has tried to take advantage of the pandemic?
Yes, I think so. I think so. And why do I say it? Now, for instance, it's all very much in the public domain. Now, we know how the pandemic has crippled us, right? We know we are not able to go to court. We do not have access to documents. We do not have access to our staff. Many of us have only chambers in the Supreme Court. We don't have luxuries of having a home office. And we ourselves, we are educated, we are all professionals, and we have seen so many struggles. But whereas the people to whom this new EIA notification, to whom it had to go, the draft notification for public comment, just imagine how difficult it would have been for the public to comment on this notification. And instead of giving them more time, they in fact first reduced the time for public comment. Then people went to court, and the court said, sorry, not only do you have to they gave them more time, but they said it has to be translated in every language, which is in the 8th schedule. That is like, you can't expect Kannada speaking people to read a Hindi document or an English document to comment. We are part of a diverse country. Sorry, you translate it into all vernacular languages so that public can comment, because it's useful to have public comment. That is a democratic process. So I do think they've taken advantage of the pandemic. And I have very many comments on the new draft legislation, but that's not the subject today. So I won't be saying much on it.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, one of our colleague, Advocate Pradeep Kumar Saha, Supreme Court of India, wants to know, ma'am, to ensure implementation of its direction, Supreme Court introduced court-appointed monitoring committee. The question is, how legitimate is such intervention of court in implementing its own decision on environmental issues?
You're talking about, I'm assuming the gentleman is talking about the CEC, which
Yes,
is the Central Empowered Committee. Now,
that committee regard, yeah.
See, this committee was set up purely for assisting the court, because environment, as you know, is a very is many a times a highly technical subject. You have biology, zoology, botany, and there are very many diverse technical issues involved, and all Supreme Court judges, etc., may not be quite familiar with these issues. And in order to further environmental justice, they constituted the Central Empowered Committee, which have forest officers, who have environmentalists, who have conservationists. Earlier, they had a conservationist like Bittu Sehgal, etc. To assist the court to come to a more just decision. So any kind of help you may take from any agency, ultimately the report is for the court to accept. It's not as if CEC gives a recommendation and it's automatically accepted. It is sent to the court, and the recommendations, the person who's aggrieved can file a response. It is argued in court, and then a decision is given. So I prima facie, I don't have any problem with something like having a CEC, etc.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, one of our colleagues, Mr. Kaushlendra, Advocate, High Court of Delhi, wants to ask that does Section 133 CRPC needs any amendment? Is it high time now? We already have the judgment of Municipal Council of Ratlam versus Vardichand in 1981. Justice Krishna Iyer has approved the activist interpretation of the provision by SDM. Should it specifically mention the environment degradation as a nuisance so that magistrate in isolated incidents take action?
Yeah. See, I'm the question, I'm not able to get it, but yes, he's talking about the law of nuisance, basically.
Nuisance, yeah.
And
in that case, SDM ordered to DM that remove the all toilets from our city.
Yeah, from a public place. Basically, it talks about unlawful obstruction or nuisance should be removed from any public place, bay, river, or channel. There's nothing really wrong with this provision.
Problem was
it's not adequate. See, that's why today, today that's why we have a specialized tribunal like the NGT, because NGT has experts. And nuisance is just one small component of pollution, and there are other issues. And this is of course, it's been in vogue. It's a part of the CRPC. It's been there for a very long time. There's no harm in both these jurisdictions. You can exercise these jurisdictions parallelly. And but I will certainly not say that this is an adequate remedy available to oust any other remedy. No, we have fought very hard to have the NGT, and NGT, as Bhakti very well said in her presentation, it does many things. It not only prevents the nuisance, it also orders for restoring it. That is, you remove the nuisance and you restore it to its original position. You give compensation, right? So there is the ambit of the NGT is much wider, and these two remedies will definitely can coexist. One cannot oust the other. If any ousting, it should be 133, not the NGT jurisdiction.
Actually, there was a problem between DM and SDM. There was a egoistic problem that DM think that how the SDM ordered me to remove all these toilets.
I see.
But here ordered in favor of SDM.
There will always be individual cases, but this is not a complete remedy.
Ma'am, our colleague Ms. Subhra Saha wants to ask question.
Sure.
Subhra?
Yeah, sure, Shubhra, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I have one question to Bonita, ma'am. Ma'am, since 1980, the Supreme Court resolved more than 100 environmental cases, but it has been complicated by lack of monitoring of Supreme Court's order and the vagueness of the legislative and executive roles regarding environmental issues. So what do you suggest if the implementing agencies and people disobey court's decision for protection of environment?
Can you, I'm sorry, I didn't follow your question.
My question is, what do you suggest if the implementing agencies and people disobey court's decision for protection of environment?
Right. Yeah, of course, contempt is clearly a remedy. If there is a court direction or a court order, contempt is a remedy. But what we are looking at is, if you look at NGT Act, for instance, and various acts, like be it Environment Protection Act, be it the NGT Act, the Forest Conservation Act, action can be taken against the regulatory agencies. Like for instance, if a pollution control board fails to act, or if forest officers fail to act, etc., action is provided. Disciplinary proceedings can be initiated against these implementing agencies. But unfortunately, no complaints are filed. And if there is a direct order of the Supreme Court which is violated, of course you have contempt. Contempt jurisdiction. But you are right. This is not a very easy, you are very right in asking that question. This is a problem that is faced. This is a problem that we constantly do face. We do face. But there are remedies in law, but how effective they are, I don't need to tell you. There are problems. There are problems.
Thank you, ma'am. Over to Mansha.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Bhakti?
Yeah, we all are listening, please.
Yeah, Bhakti, I would like to ask one last question to you.
Yeah, Mansha, please.
As you earlier told regarding a case, Indian Council for Enviro Legal Action, very
Yes.
famous case,
Yes.
well known as a Bichdi village case.
Yes, yes.
You elaborated very well.
Yeah.
Bhakti, in this question case, I would like to ask one last question. The central government has time and time to again defeated the directions issued the apex court by not implementing the said directions. In the earlier mentioned case for 15 years, is there a way out of it? Can the court do anything to stop this practice of the deep state? And one sub question in this question also, why has the court time and time again refrained from issuing mandamus to the executive branch in environmental cases? Why only directions are issued, which can be easily sidestepped?
Mansha, see, directions have been issued by the Honorable Supreme Court in various matters, and in my experience, like in our own SCWLA matter, the matter related to carving out of alternate route for trucks, what we saw that the Honorable NGD and the Honorable Supreme Court also issued some directions, and whenever those directions are not complied, the court has very huge powers. They call the chief secretary, they call office bearers, other office bearers, and they are pulled very much by the Honorable Court, and the court ensures that all those directions are being complied with. Like in our own matter, in the alternate routes matter also, initially the authorities, they were not taking things seriously. They were making excuses. Prerna was also there. Then we did some research and we found that the pleas they were raising were just excuses. But then ultimately, when we were able to convince the court, the Honorable NGT also issued directions. The Supreme Court also issued directions. Then alternate routes were carved out. And now we have that highway also in the Sonipat, which is there. So the court has own ways. Court issues directions, whether it's mandamus or its direction. Mandamus is also a direction, but the court has powers. Whenever something has to be ensured, court ensures, and it is fulfilled. It is done. But there are some things which have to be done. I'm sure it will be taken up gradually. Those things will be mitigated.
Yeah, actually in this case, order was passed in 1996, and thereafter 15 years, in 2011, court issued another directions in this matter also. That's why I'm asking.
Yes, there are so many matters like this matters also, like you may remember T.N. Godavarman also. This matter is pending in Supreme Court since last so many years. But gradually, what happens? The court keeps certain matters pending because some committees are appointed, like in the matter where CNG was introduced in Delhi in 2000. 2001, Burelal committee was appointed. So court appoints committees. So court awaits for reports of those committees, because these are environmental matters which contain some serious issues, like there is issue like in Ganga pollution matter also, there is issue of relocation of industries or setting up of treatment plant. There are so many things which have to be done, which take time. If simple directions are issued and matter is not kept pending, that court will not be able to monitor what is happening in those matters. So these are some matters which take sometimes, like relocation of industry, and like in case of CNG, gradually shifting from petrol vehicles or diesel vehicles to CNG, framing of policy regarding CNG, getting CNG plants, getting CNG, all this takes time. So these matters are kept pending, and court, in fact, the committees appointed by the court monitors those things.
Okay. Thank you, Bhakti. Over to
thank
Prerna.
you.
Thanks, Mansa. Now I would like to invite Sudha Palji. Sudha Pal, please come and give vote of thanks. Sudha Pal.
Thank you, Prerna ji. Thank you. Very good evening to all. I am Sudha Par. It's my great privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. I want to express my gratitude to keynote speaker Ms. Anita Sinha, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India. We are honored to have with us today, ma'am. You have spared your precious time for us and graced this occasion with your presence, ma'am. We are indeed lucky to get your unconditional love and support. With your guidance, lot of knowledge, wonderful presentation, this webinar has been very fruitful and beneficial for all of us. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. I extend our sincere thanks to our beloved President, Ms. Mahalakshmi Pawani, Senior Advocate, for delivering the presidential address, for being backbone in endeavor and constantly motivating and inspiring us every step. Ma'am, you are strength of the association. Thank you so much, ma'am. Heartfelt thanks goes to our dedicated Vice President, Ms. Bhakti Pasija Sethi. She is a very sagacious and amiable. Thank you so much, my dear. I want to thank Vice President Priyanka Yasmathu. She is a very courageous. Thank you so much, my dear. Our special thanks goes to our General Secretary, Ms. Prerna Kumari. She is a very dynamic and energetic. Thank you so much, my dear. I would like to thank our Assistant Secretary, Ms. Mansa Singh. She is very peace-loving. Thank you so much, my dear. I would like to thank our Assistant Treasurer, Ms. Subhra Shah. She is a very cooperative. Thank you so much, my dear. I would like to thank our Member Executive, Ms. Mahir Ravisrain. She is a very sincere and hard work. Thank you so much, my dear. Finally, behind every successful event lies the combined and dedicated efforts of our Swala team. I am very glad and thankful to all the participants for their valuable presence and support, which is highly appreciated. Thank you all for being some response from your side for future webinar. Thank you so much. Once again, I thank one and all present here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Prerna.
Thank you, ma'am.
Prerna, before everyone leaves, thank you, Anita. Thank you so much for being part of this webinar and enlightening us. I've learned so much from you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apart from the fact that you help so much in the environmental issues and things like that, you have contributed a lot. I request all the audience today, as part of being citizens of this country, you all also put in your contribution. Please leave this planet Earth cleaner and greener for the future generations, for our children, for our grandchildren, and our great grandchildren, so that the world is a beautiful place to live in. And thank you all, my dears, in Sudha's words. Thank you.
Thank you.